Why is there such a huge gap between what we think parenting will be and what it actually is? What are the jobs of mums and dads now?
When you're first setting out in the dating field, you're not like looking for a man who's going to stay at home.
What's a dad now he's no longer just a provider? What's a mum now that she often is?
So when you are a full-time working mother, all the evidence shows they often overcompensate because they're not there at home as much as they could be if they were stay-at-home mothers.
Why, when we think having children will bring us closer together, does it so often push us apart?
We have this cognitive bias where we actually think people know what we're thinking more than we actually do. And so often when we're frustrated, we're like, oh, they must know, they can tell why I'm angry.
What am I supposed to teach or model for my children when I have no idea what the world is going to look like in 5 years' time? Why did my parents have so much conviction about these things and I have absolutely none? Well, I don't know, but there are some really intelligent people all around the world who've been thinking about this stuff, and they are going to talk to me, and we might not answer all those questions every week, but if we listen to their ideas, maybe we can get some wisdom and some insight, and maybe most importantly, some perspective, and find out what it takes to be a happier parent. This week, I'm speaking with the BBC science journalist and author, Melissa Hogenboom. This is a big one for me because Melissa wrote the first book I ever read on motherhood, the motherhood complex. Melissa lives near me and we get to have discussions like this one quite regularly. But for this episode, we focused on her new book, Breadwinners. It's a book about how to address the power dynamics in your work, life and love. There are more female breadwinners than ever before, more female partners outstripping their male partners' earnings than ever before. But how are these changing dynamics affecting the way we see our roles as mums and dads? We talk about what we can learn from same-sex couples who don't carry the same gendered expectations in their partnerships. We talk about status and fairness and why they're both fundamentally important in human relationships. And Melissa gives lots of great examples about how she manages to avoid resentment with her own partner. I hope you enjoy this episode. Breadwinners is a book about power dynamics in our day-to-day life and the way we interact, but there's a real focus on family and relationships and the home. And the bit of the book that is living inside me as I move around the world and is giving me a different lens on interactions, you draw a distinction between money, status and power and how they do overlap, but they're not the same.
So if you look at individuals in positions of power, they often have wealth. So power and money are really closely tied together because once you have a certain amount of wealth, either through a job, which, you know, if you're a boss in a company or you're a lawyer, you tend to have power and then money as well. Status is interesting because power and money can give you status because it can give you access to resources that others don't have, but they're not necessarily the same. So the extreme example I used in the book is a political prisoner perhaps has a high status because they're outspoken about inequality or whatever they're, being punished for. So they have people who admire them and have high status, but they have no power because they have complete lack of freedom. Whereas a bullying boss has a high power over their employees, but relatively little status. So their employees may not be able to feel they can speak up and therefore don't respect their boss, but their boss has power over them, which is kind of a contradiction and creates a lot of discomfort.
Let's take this status specifically lens, because what your book argues is that actually humans aren't all naturally driven to seek power, but we are all driven to seek status. So if we look at what's happened to mums, let's say since 1990, we have this massive move of women into work where suddenly they can earn their own status, right? There's an author called Tara Porter who the other day was talking about the fact that the role used to be housewife, And that gives you a clue to where the status is there, right? It's from like the size of your house, maybe being a domestic goddess, and from your role as a wife. So a lot of your status there comes from what your husband does. And then what the move into work does is suddenly women can get their own status, right? But then what happens to the role of mother? It becomes more competitive, because if now you can't make, it's very hard to continue working as a mum. So now the role of mother becomes competitive because status is always competitive. Am I getting this right?
I think what you're getting at is, as Will Storr put it, status is not a luxury; it's a basic human need. And this kind of goes back to the evolutionary research that finds
So
that
Will
we're
Storr is the author of the status
author of
game.
the
Is that
status
right?
game. So yeah, we're primed kind of on a very basic level to need and seek status. But what you're getting at is how we define and pursue it varies across cultures, what life stages you are, and your values as an individual. And we're a very competitive bunch. And so what that means is we're constantly comparing ourselves to others around us. And so in the past, status meant you had better access to resources, you had better mates, you were able to protect yourself from the environment. And so then if you take that into a modern lens, whatever environment we can control, we will try and seek some status within that, because when we lack status, we feel disempowered and it causes stress. And when we're stressed, our brain doesn't work in an optimal way. And so with motherhood, it's an interesting contradiction, because women are able to seek status from economic resources. They can get jobs, they can get public recognition in the workforce. But for some, they are not able to do that because of, childcare costs, or because they've moved and there's no job for them, or because, they married young and were not able to pursue a career, or they stopped their career because they felt they had to choose family over work. And there's all these kind of forces at play that make these not true decisions. But what you find is that mothers in particular will then refactor their values. If they had to quit work, they'll put everything into being the best mother. And within that realm, it will give you a sense of status because you're doing motherhood better than other people. And it becomes competitive. And I think a lot of mothers who are stuck in this cycle won't realize necessarily that they're doing it. And then you'll find that a lot of these kind of mothers have tools available to them from, their network to be able to volunteer at parent groups. You'll find any PTA you go into, maybe you're the exception. I know you're very involved in your kids' schools, but for the majority of parents in these PTA groups, it's mums running the show, and often they are working part-time or not working at all. Not always, of course, that's a big generalization.
So this is what's been going on for me this week. I'm talking to my friend and she's like, oh God, it's exhausting. I've got to work at this event after the school sports day. We're doing a fundraiser on the Wednesday. We're on a God. I'm like, God, yeah, that really does sound awful. Just don't do it. Don't let someone else do it. But that's what's going on there, right? There's a status play.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of judgment and guilt in motherhood that's tied into that. So when you are a full-time working mother, all the evidence shows that looks into kind of how couples or how mothers feel about parenting, they often overcompensate because they're not there at home as much as they could be if they were stay-at-home mothers. And then if you aren't working and you're a stay-at-home mother, that affects your identity in a different way. And so to kind of make that more comfortable, you can put everything into motherhood. And so you are being a productive member of your society and household. And I mean, we know from the psychological literature that when we have a sense of purpose, we are happier, kind of that bigger picture thinking. And so if you can create that, which kind of comes back to status, you have a status and purpose in your particular domain.
Right. Because it's a basic, fundamental human need. And actually, I think, and now I can hear myself saying it, I'm making this kind of desire for status sound quite negative. But actually, you've linked it there with meaning. What that seems to imply is that we can't get out of this human need for status. But I wonder if we we have some kind of subjective decision we can make about what gives us status and what doesn't. There's a choice that lies there that we can decide. What do you think about that?
I think that if we are aware of the fact that why we feel disempowered if we lack status, and the fact that gaining more financial power doesn't actually make us happier, it will allow us to make choices that benefit us as well. I mean, I was discussing this last night with a few other school mums, and I was talking about, yes, I like writing books because it gives me a sense of status. It fulfills my ambition. It gives me, that kind of dopamine hit that I'm doing something big and exciting. But also, why am I writing about equality and equal rights for women in the first place? It's because I want to leave a better world for my children and all other little boys and girls. I don't want them to grow up in a society where women are expected to drop their hours if they don't want to, but they feel they have to because of the expectation or the lack of resources to be able to work full time. I want it to be a true choice. I don't want to live in a world, I know you touch a lot on masculinity, where men feel that they have to suppress their emotions. And so I think if we're aware of that, and aware that when we chase the hedonic treadmill, I love this term, kind of that sense that you get those initial endorphins when you get external recognition, but then that quickly subsides. And so you seek recognition again and again and again. And that's why I think when you seek status, it can become murky, and power hungry individuals can get lost along the way because they are seeking these extra kind of hits of dopamine that they get when they publish the new thing or get a new promotion and they get more money. But actually, lots of the research, which brings us back to the start, is when you have a sense of purpose and when you're thinking about others more than yourself, when you're kind of more other orientated, you are happier in the long run.
You described a very common situation there where the mum, leaves work because the numbers aren't adding up, or feels so like pressure to be with the child in a way that the dad doesn't. I think one of the things I just want to pick out here is this really interesting thing that we can all feel, which is that studies show that mums are regarded as less dedicated to work, regardless of how they behave, and dads who apply for part-time work are judged a lot more harshly than mums.
Yeah.
Their characters are, which I think is really interesting because it's really bad for both. And I think we talk a lot about the first one, but actually the second one, a lot of women are like, well, why doesn't the guy go part-time? Like, that's what I've had to do. We can all feel this stuff. We can feel it as men. It's like, oh, I can't really put my finger on it, but it's just not okay for me to ask. And it turns out that's bang on because people think you're lazy and like basically a bad man if you do that.
Women, when they request part-time, they know they will be judged for it as less kind of committed, and it might affect their career prospects on a kind of financial front. They will be literally earning less money, but they do it anyway because it's expected and they feel they have to. Men know that they will be judged for requesting part-time, and therefore they don't do it because it will affect their career. And so women take on this sacrifice because they always have and they're expected to. And that an academic I spoke to, Jasmine Callan, calls it the fatherhood forfeit. She did a lot of research and she found that there's two different kind of types of fathers. She calls them the fuck it fathers, excuse the language, but she calls it that because there was a subset of fathers that she found that were like, I will make the workplace work for me. I will request it and they will mold it to my needs. But that often comes from a position of confidence and privilege and seniority, right? Like if you know your skill set's desirable, you can determine more of your kind of parameters. Then there was fathers who wanted to request it, felt that it would affect their career, but did it anyway because they realized their family was more important than their work. But they were aware it might kind of affect them negatively. And then there was fathers who worked flexibly kind of in secret. So they just picked up the kids from school without telling their bosses because they knew they'd be judged for it. And then when Jasmine interviewed employers, she found that fathers were judged more negatively if they requested it. And so, which is why a lot of them don't request it in the first place. But that it's so important to recognize, because until men start requesting it, it's only going to be women who continue to pick up the slack. And then that has implications for equality at home, because it's a time spent thing, right? If you're at home more, you're going to be doing more childcare and housework, for women anyway. Same is not true for men, sadly. But it just kind of reinforces this cycle of unfairness, which then affects relationship satisfaction as well.
Let's just jump in on that, because what you're saying there, which I think is, and I think you mentioned this in your first book that I read, The Motherhood Complex, which was that actually when women take flexible working, they use that to do more childcare and domestic work. And when men take flexible working, they work from home. And by the way, I'm unclear on whether that is something that where men have to become more like women. It feels like if you want to work flexibly, then women continue to present more of a risk if then that flexible working is used to do domestic work. Like, and my mates who are, like, yeah, no, I'm working from home one day a week, and that their partners are like, that's great. So now you can do this, 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 and this. And it's like, no, sorry, I'm working from home on that day. Like, women's flexible working will be more of a risk unless women take that attitude, no?
Yeah, it's a real problem, and you saw this very starkly during kind of the pandemic when more men and women were working from home. Men would literally shut the door to their offices, whereas women tended to work in more open plan environments where they didn't get the office. Like, there was such a division. And even before the pandemic, there's research to show that men see their roles as more rigid and inflexible, and women kind of seek flexibility from the outset, even in the types of careers they go into. So in the legal profession, for instance, some women who want to be lawyers actually opted out before even getting there because they realized, oh, okay, I have to put in 60-hour weeks. That's not compatible with childcare. And of the women that I know that do that type of work, they outsource. It's not the man that's at home with the kid. They have to outsource the labor to a nanny often. And then women feel a lot of guilt for that as well. But then, of course, and I think this is why it's always good to bring it back to a little bit back to the positive, there is an increase of stay-at-home fathers and an increase of breadwinning women with men who earn slightly less. And those men are doing slightly more childcare. Not as much as the breadwinning women, which is kind of the whole thesis that starts the book out. Like, if you earn more money as a woman, you still do more childcare and housework than your lower earning male spouse. But if the man stays at home and the woman's working, he does a lot more childcare than any of the other men. But then it kind of reverts to more traditional roles at the weekend.
Should we care about earning, or should we care about time spent on a job?
Well, basic economic theory, if you want to get academic, which I think is occasionally interesting, suggests that if you are it's literally a time spent thing, right? If you're out the house more, you have less time to do housework. So the person who's out the house more and usually therefore earning more money will be doing less housework. And then also, like, what if someone is working for a charity? So it's a high status job, but low pay, and their partner is an accountant. So it's maybe a slightly less high status job, but higher pay. Like, just because that person has a lower paid job, it doesn't mean they should be doing more at home, right? And so I think that's why the conversations about who does what are really important, and coming to a solution. So in my household, I often use this example that I do more of the cooking, but I have always done it even before children. Therefore, I have become better at it, quicker, more competent. And because we've discussed it, it hasn't actually led to resentment. Like, sometimes I will be fed up and I can't think about what to eat, or please, can you do it this weekend? And that's totally fine. But because we've kind of discuss that I'm happy to do that, because when I get frustrated, he's like, what can I do? What can I take over? Which I know is the classic, like, that's still
Just
mental
tell me
load
what to do.
if you hand it over. But that has to be the start. You can't just be like, do everything and then expect him to know that you've got broccoli that needs eating up, or that there's a hidden packet of orzo at the back of the cupboard, right? Like, you do need to respect what expertise you have in which domain if you're handing something over, and it can't be instant. If you want to share the cooking 50-50, the partner also needs to know what you have in the house and when you do the shopping and whether to do the shopping. So sometimes doing it 50-50 isn't actually that useful, because then you're both doubling up on your knowledge. But if you're happy to do that and you can each jump in at any given time, then that's fine. So my point is, time spent is not always an issue if you've discussed it and if you have more time available. I'm often home earlier because I don't have a client-facing role, and therefore my hours are more in my control. And so therefore I've always been able to kind of do the cooking earlier. If that was the other way around, absolutely, my husband would be the chef in the household, and I would have ensured that that was the case, right? So I think it's a time spent, it's how much money you earn, it all comes into play, but also respecting each other's time, even if you're the one working less. I think that's really important, like carving out time so that they can have some autonomy in their decisions. So they're not, the default project manager of the household, which is where a lot of women end up and then get very frustrated.
You describe the power that women have in the home at one point as faux power. Why? Why is, if power is the ability to make decisions and influence people and to a certain extent dictate, why is the power that women have in the home, why is that faux power?
This is such a good example because I think it exposes the complications of the power we feel we have versus the absolute power we have. So power in the home, being able to choose what food to eat, what schools your kid go to, what they're wearing, when you're having guests round, what time. So you're making all these household decisions. So you're kind of the power holder in the home, right? But often that happens because you're disempowered outside of it. And this is potentially most stark for stay-at-home mothers. They have very little financial power, which is, sociologists call it positional power. So this is the power you get from your income or status outside of the home usually. But then they have a high sense of power, which is the ability to influence things in the home. And so if you have a high sense of power, it can feel quite rewarding. If you can tell your partner what to wear so they look nicer and what restaurant you're going to, and you can decide, which sofa to buy and what artwork to buy. And a lot of couples, especially when the man is earning more, they do leave a lot of those household decisions to their partner, and they like proudly do. It's like, oh well, she's the boss of the home. And I've had situations where I've tried to organize like a get together and I get sent the mum's number. Oh, she organizes her social calendar, ask her. So often that power in the home is a product of the fact that women have less power in the working world. And that's changing, but it's still the case that women tend to earn it's still the case that women tend to earn less than men overall, because earnings are so closely tied to power, both how we view power, but also on a practical sense, your purchasing power. It's why I describe it as faux power.
It's interesting that bit in there as well about the social calendar, because actually mums do tend, I wonder if that's actually female partners, regardless of being parents, tend to be much better because of the way, maybe because of the way they communicate at booking things in advance. And a lot of my mates would be like, my whole, all my weekends, all my free time is actually completely taken up with seeing my wife's friends who I love. But I'm like, yeah, I miss you guys, which is bad for everyone. Like, you don't want your husband to not have his own mates. It's like, it's just bad news as we get older. Like, it's like very, very bad for men to lose that. And I think the other thing that happens there is that you get, as you say, you get this assumption that it's going, whether they're working or not, it's going to be women who kind of organize events. So when we go on holiday, like the women have booked stuff and they've organized stuff and they've done all this really, really intense kind of emotional labor. And there's really difficult negotiations kind of going on there with each other, but it's done between women, and men instinctively aren't invited into those conversations and kind of aren't quite wanted there.
I think this comes back down to how women are socialized. So from a very early age, dads talk more about emotions to their daughters than their sons. I think this fact is staggering. Women literally talk more to their daughters than their sons, like in terms of just words used. And then we kind of give our daughters more emotional language, and we ascribe boys in more active based verbs. And we, like, as you know, dads are like, they do more rough and tumble play with their sons and daughters. So I think this is tied into all that. So women are socialized into a world where they're expected to communicate better, to have higher empathy, to have more of these softer nurturing traits from a really, really early age. And what that does is then, of course, they become better at it. Add that into more time available because they're working fewer hours overall, gender pay gap. So they have more time available. And women tend to find themselves in more social environments, especially in the shift to motherhood. So dads that are stay-at-home dads are actually quite lonely. They don't have this social circle, whereas there's loads of mum groups. Dads actually feel kind of ostracized from the mum groups. Lots of reports have shown. Women can refactor their identity as being head of the PTA or doing a voluntary organization. Men are less likely to do that. And so that, I think all of that adds up to a world where women are organizing more of the calendar, the social calendar, for all these reasons.
And I think what your book suggests is because that socialization is so powerful,
yeah,
that actually, if we're not mindful of it, you talk about over communicating and not accepting stereotypes. If we don't constantly challenge ourselves to do this, we will slip into the thing I've just described with the women organizing everything. And even, you know, as someone who talks about this a lot, new jobs that emerge as my children get older, like my daughter, my 16-year-old has just gone on holiday with all her mates. She's finished her GCSEs. And my wife did the whole thing without it. Like, I didn't even really clock it until I was like, sorry, how are you getting there? Like, you know, we hadn't even had a conversation around it. It's just, it becomes a default.
Yeah.
Unless you explicitly challenge it.
Yeah, and it doesn't have to, I think.
Well, no, but also I think, so the reason that's a problem is because the thing you identify is just how important fairness is to us.
Yeah. Yeah, it ties into the fact that women do more of the mental load, so the anticipating of what needs doing. But I'll give you a counterexample. So I think, I don't know if it was 5 years ago, I was so tired from the day-to-day during the week that I said to my partner, I can't plan weekends. We need plans. The kids go, you know, over energetic, to put it nicely. If we stay at home, we need to do things, but I just don't have the mental energy to think about the weekend as well as just getting through the week. And so he took a lot on of that weekend planning. And now I'd say we kind of equally, you know, last weekend we were at a barbecue at his friends, and tomorrow we're meeting up with mutual friends. He takes the kids swimming every Saturday. So he took on a lot of the weekend organization, but it took me kind of vocalizing that it wasn't working because we were both so busy during the week. It gets to the end of the week, and then if we hadn't booked an activity, or there was a time when you had to book swimming, you couldn't just turn up. If we hadn't booked it on time, we wouldn't be able to do it. And so I think it's absolutely possible, regardless of how much you both work.
I can see me putting that clip up on Instagram,
yeah,
and someone be like, "Why should I have to ask?" Go on.
I think women, we know, and we've all discussed this a lot in the past, women do the majority of the mental load. And for anyone this is new to, this is the anticipating, researching, planning, and then the decision making is more shared. So there's kind of 4 aspects to the mental load. So we know this happens. if you want your partner to be more involved, there has to be kind of a handover period and a discussion. This is work in itself, this is the mental load. But until you do that, he might not realize what aspect you're frustrated about. So, yes, you shouldn't have to ask all the time, but for sure, if there's something particularly stressful for you, he might not realize. And there was a really interesting paper I came across that says we have this cognitive bias where we actually think people know what we're thinking more than we actually do. And so often when we're frustrated, we're like, oh, they must know, they can tell why I'm angry. But if that was the case, why would there be so much relationship conflict, right? Like, we don't understand what we're thinking. We don't understand the pressure points. It's hard for me to vocalize that I'm already thinking about the September clubs and what to sign up for. And if we sign up now, does it mean we won't get to do tennis if we do drama? And like, for sure, he's not thinking about that. But until I vocalize it, then it's kind of my mental load and he won't be able to share it. But if we discuss it, he can kind of help me make a decision. Or I can say, look, you book the tennis. And one couple I spoke to said that every few months when they feel it's getting imbalanced, they literally sit down and go, right, you're doing the clubs for our son, I will do the clubs for our daughter. And that's how they split it end to end. And so it's not just the researching the clubs, it's paying for it, making sure they have the right shoes for that club, communicating if someone else needs picked up on time, like all those tiny
Yeah,
little...
we're back to the sort of fair play system and why
Yeah.
that does actually work there, right? I think that bias that we know what people are thinking that characterized so many of mine and Eloise's arguments,
Yeah.
where I'd be like, what is up? And she would shut down. And now we talk about it, she was like, I just couldn't believe that you couldn't see it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like I was just like, I couldn't conceive that you couldn't see all the things that I could see.
Exactly.
And yes, that is male privilege. The fact that I could, that I can't, I haven't had to. And if we were separated, as my dad, my mate, who's now a kind of co-parent, he now sees it all. Yeah. It's not gendered unless you're together, which I think brings us neatly on to what can we learn from same-sex couples. Yours is the first book. You're the first person I've had on here whose book hasn't been entirely heteronormative. So yeah, tell what because obviously they don't have this gendered problem, right?
Yeah, so that was fascinating because looking at same-sex couples allows us to see how gendered relationships are. And actually, I gave a talk this week to a business that wants to empower women to, have more opportunities. And one of the questions I got there, this woman, she said, everything you say resonates with me. I'm in a same-sex relationship, and we never default upon certain patterns. We always discuss it. It's like, I'm a bit sick of cooking, can you do it tonight? I'm a bit sick of it. Like, it's not an issue because there's no expectation of who is doing what. And what the researchers found that same-sex couples often divide tasks according to skill set and who is better and who wants to do it. And then if no one wants to do it, like this one lovely female same-sex couple I interviewed, they said neither of them particularly likes cooking, so they share it. They just make sure that they do it together. So before they had a child, they did it together and they made it a communal thing. Now that they have a child, they share it while the other one does the childcare. And they found that that's a way of them not feeling resentment for the other. And then female same-sex couples are also more likely to have children. But male same-sex couples, when I interviewed a couple who do have a child, in fact, they were the first couple in Germany to a same-sex male couple to adopt. The interviewee, Ben, he said he kind of looks at his friends and he says he's shocked at how far we still have to go. And one of the really eye-opening quotes is he says a lot of his friends think they are doing childcare so equally and they're being really great dads because they're doing better than their fathers did. But still, like, they have their wives have to ask permission for a weekend away, or not ask, but you know what I mean? Like, they have to check in with them in the way that the men maybe don't. And so he kind of really notices. And he also, another thing is, which is especially what men seem to find, I think both heterosexual and gay men, is they get congratulated for doing the bare minimum, as he said. He's like, I'm just out with my child and I get these women coming up to me and going, oh, you're being such a good dad, when I'm literally just parenting. And
That feels like it's fading pretty fast. As you said, now, if it's about half and half at your school gates, I think the reason that was happening so much was because it was remarkable.
I
Because we
think
didn't know men could be nurturers.
in our liberal London bubble, yes, but not
Right.
in a lot of society. It's really not fading in many, many places where the gender divides are so rigid. So I think like it's all very well for us to speak about it, and probably the audience listening is already worried and thinking about it. But the people we need to reach are the ones that, are really affected when caring clashes with their idea of masculinity, which is a real thing. And it is changing for sure. And it's changing because of economic circumstance for the most part. When men are thrust into caregiving roles, it's largely out of economic necessity.
Yeah. So the first studies that led to the whole realization that men change when they become nurturers were in the Filipino community. Because all the mums, there's a lot more money to be made in childcare. We know certainly I know, like Notting Hill, areas like that, huge bodies of like the nanny network are Filipino. So you have these men left at home looking after kids. Financials brought about this massive cultural shift there of men being primary carers.
Yeah. And I think the more that they are, the more rewarding they'll find it. And that's why it's so nice to see the evidence that shows when men do more care, they actually feel more bonded with their children. And so if they have felt like outside of this conversation, they're now being included more than ever before. And I think it is rewarding. And then that becomes hopefully self-fulfilling.
Yeah, I mean, I think let's talk about stay-at-home dads. I think what was fascinating about and it's not, I don't have a large sample size at all, it's all anecdotal, but the stay-at-home dads, sorry, let's say full-time dads, they would never stay at home, they're not stupid. Full-time dads, the stories, the way they spoke about things, kind of contrary to some of the stuff that you quoted, were like, this was supposed to be a 5 days a week thing, but actually I'm the one who knows where everything is, so I end up doing everything at the weekend. Blah. It all could have been coming from women. What was missing was the resentment.
Yeah.
Which basically, comes to your point of actually when we discuss things, when we communicate, when we make a decision, because these men hadn't fallen into a stereotypical role, they weren't angry about being in it.
Yeah, I think that's what's really reassuring. So I spoke to a few who really welcomed and embraced their role. So one of them made a conscious decision. They didn't like their job. They had a child with additional needs, and they were like, it makes sense for my partner to go back after maternity leave. She's got the higher earning potential. So it was a practical decision in the moment. But then the more he was at home, the more he felt value from being that presence. And then another one I spoke to said he was trying to correct how he'd grown up. So he was in a home where his dad was never present, and his dad was kind of a bit of a macho, stereotypical, in quote marks for listeners, masculine man. And he said, I don't want to be like that for my children. It's so fleeting. Before I know it, they'll be teenagers. I want to be present. And so he was able to make that decision. And then that's where there's a lack of resentment and a willing and kind of just mucking it. And I think when it's more challenging when it's out of economic necessity. And you find in those scenarios, men kind of refactored their roles as like they were more likely to call themselves unemployed than staying home for their children, or they said they had an illness. So it was that status as being a carer was uncomfortable.
Unemployed is higher status than full-time father.
Because then it suggests they're temporarily, out of the workforce, whereas they probably will be looking for work. So I think it's during the economic
because statistically we're not comfortable with full-time fathers.
No, women and men alike. Like it's not. It's why Yeah, men feel that cognitive dissonance of not being the primary earner because it's so expected by men and women, right? Like it's for sure it's changing, and as soon as you're coupled, you have different expectations. When you're first setting out in the dating field, you're not like looking for a man who's going to stay at home. For most of my friends, anyway, that just wasn't a question. I don't think anyone would market themselves that way, and most people start out working if they can.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. Amongst my friendship group, I would say the majority have ended up with partners who certainly before they have kids had higher earning potential than they did. And I just think that's going to happen more and more, basically because women get their shit together quicker than men do. But because they know they've got a kind of shorter body clock before they have kids. And I just think that's going to happen more and more. So then you have this thing of Richard Reeves said that the thing about earning and having a job is it's basically quite a good indicator that you're going to be a good dad. I mean, it's one of the indicators that people can see that's like, oh, you've got your stuff together. Luckily, it's not one my wife was looking for because I was all over the place. But, what are women going to be looking for as earnings become more equal? Women will have to be less interested in marrying up, right?
And they're marrying down more. There's an economic paper that looked at that, and the education gap is now favoring women. So more women are educated to degree level than ever before. And so they're having to kind of downward marry. That's why the traits that we need to value in a relationship are empathy and caring. And if women have higher earning potential, then the finances isn't as big a deal. I mean, I was very young when I met my partner, and he was working minimum wage in a pub. We didn't even think about money, but I think that was the kind of naivety of youth. But I think lots of people, expect to fall in love, and they're not necessarily thinking too strategically about what their partner might earn unless they're maybe meeting in their 30s. But we are attracted to power. And so there's also other research that shows that people would forego the typical romantic features in a potential mate if they had higher power. So that's not necessarily money.
So let's talk about power, because there's this very interesting theme of your book, which is that power kills empathy. Just because I think it's such a funny example. I have always done this thing where, you're driving along and like a Range Rover pulls out and kind of behaves badly in some way. And I was like, oh God, you rich dick. And then I'm like, no, don't do that. You're just pissed off because you can't afford that car. But actually what your book shows is actually you're much more likely to drive like a dick if you are in a Range Rover or a Porsche.
So one of the early studies in looking at how power and status affect our behaviors, they did a lot of lab-based studies, and there was literally one where the powerful boss was more likely to take the last cookie and eat loudly and not care about others. And it's because power has this disinhibiting effect. When you're in a position of power, you care less about what others think of you. And part of that is out of necessity, right? If you're a boss or a leader of a large organization, you can't spend too much time worrying about everyone else. But the downside is that you have, the expensive car drivers are more likely to break rules. And that was a real example. The researchers were watching cars at a busy junction, and those who drove the most expensive cars were more likely to break traffic rules and drive more recklessly. And so much subsequent research has shown that people in position of power are less vigilant, but they're also more positive, and they show reduced empathy, which is a problem because you need empathy to get into a position of power. But once you are in a position of power, that trait is diminished. And it's why people often become more self-serving, why they then chase more and more power. And this is what psychologists call the power paradox. It's a paradox because you need empathy to become powerful, and then once you have it, you lose empathy. People in positions of power, you can literally see parts of their brain are more like that of a psychopath. And another fact which I loved is among the general population, about 1% have psychopathic traits, but among leadership, it's about 12%. And the reason why that might be is because people with dominant personality traits more likely to seek power in the first place. So that becomes then kind of self-perpetuating.
The implications of that for the argument about how one would fight patriarchy are huge, because what your book argues is that the fact that women are more empathetic is not actually to do with gender. It's often to do with the fact that they're in lower power positions, and actually power affects us all in the same way. So I should want, to dismantle the patriarchy because I want my daughter to have the same chances as my sons, not, which is sometimes the argument, because if she got power, she'd be much kinder with it.
Yeah, it's a tricky contradiction. I think what what I take from a lot of this research is we want power to have autonomy over our lives. Women have traditionally been disempowered outside the home. They seek it inside the home, but that kind of gives them less power than men overall. And I think another eye-opening study that came out really recently is that a lot of gender imbalances are actually power imbalances. So it's the fact that men have traditionally held the power in society, which causes the gender imbalance, right? So if you are disempowered, you then need to get literally better at reading the room and enact your empathy skills. And so again, it becomes very self-perpetuating.
Empathy is a skill we're forced to hone lower down in a power hierarchy.
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, they've literally done studies where people from lower socioeconomic status, so people who are more likely to come from poverty, are better at reading the facial expressions of others because they depend on others to get ahead because they're disempowered. And so you can see then why that would translate into when you have lower power, you have to use your softer skills more and more to kind of eke out some level of control over your life. But if you're perpetually disempowered, it kind of leaves you more stressed, breeds resentment, and less able to get out of that cycle. So I think it is positive that women can gain more power from their economic output. They're becoming more women are breadwinners than ever before in recent society. And although that's not changing how we kind of divide tasks at home very quickly, I think it will in the future because women are seeing the results of being empowered and hopefully not being corrupted by it. Some, of course, will be, but this will allow them
sorry,
to make
what it suggests is that that's not necessarily going to lead to a kinder world, right?
It's not necessarily, but I think because women have been socialized the way they have, I would hope that they're more able to tap into their empathy and compassion. And especially because in the workforce, there's more discourse about that. There's increasing amounts of kind of, let's do compassion and empathy training. I mean, there's mixed evidence of whether that works or not, but we're more aware of it. And that's how you keep power in check, by seeing it as a responsibility rather than a method for control. And if we're confronting ourselves with that, then I think there is room to be powerful but maintain a sense of kind of responsibility and compassion.
Right, right. Your book finishes with a list of takeaways and solutions. And I guess I wanted to just talk about why fairness is so important. Have you seen the it went viral ages ago, but the experiment with the capuchin monkeys? Where, so just for everyone listening, it's just look it up. So they get monkeys to do this task, pass them a rock, and they reward them both with a piece of cucumber. And they do it again, and they reward them with cucumber. Then they do it again, and they reward one of them with a grape and the other one with cucumber, and the cucumber one goes nuts and starts kind of and like throws the kind of. Have you seen this?
I've interviewed the man behind the work, Frans de Waal.
Oh, brilliant! What's he called?
Frans de Waal. He died recently actually, but he's absolutely fascinating.
So I mean, basically, I think what I learned from that is that actually the arguments that my wife used to have about fairness, about the mental load, about distribution of labor, all that stuff, the reason they were so savage was actually this isn't really a rational human thing at all. This is a very primal thing that even our kind of primate ancestors understood. So what can we do to be having these conversations about fairness and tackling it in a way that is going to make all our lives better? I'm talking about as parents.
I think, like with many of these issues, the first part is understanding it. So that's why I love that experiment. So it explains, as you said, that morality and a sense of fairness are really crucial for our survival, or they have been. So they're kind of deeply embedded in our evolution. It really stings when something's unfair. We're more likely to punish someone and get nothing than let kind of a partner in a game we're playing get $12 when we only get five, you know? So it's so deeply embedded. So if we see an unfair distribution of work at home, if we are paid unfairly, like it really affects us on a very deep psychological level. And so when it comes to the home, it's such a fundamental human trait, and a lack of equal care at home, not just a lack of care, but a lack of perceived distribution of fairness. So there's a study where they asked men and women if they thought that it was fair, and men tended to overestimate how much they do, and women were perhaps more accurate. Maybe they overestimated too, but who knows? It was about the discrepancy. So when there was a larger discrepancy of what the man said he did at home compared to the woman, it was most likely to lead to a relationship breaking down. So it's so important for your relationship to show a willingness to be fair if you want to maintain, you know, your relationship. So I think on that basic level, we need to correct it. And of course, there's loads of other reasons why, like what world are we bringing our children up to if we're not exemplifying the fact that both mummy and daddy can do the laundry? You know, that's a very basic example, but it matters because it can have such a big impact.
That perception piece is so interesting because actually I think, you know, when we still live in a world where you've got more women stepping away from work to look after children, that's often not what makes things intolerable for them. It's often the fact that the stuff they're doing isn't seen or acknowledged, and the guy is feels it's fair and they know it's not. You know, my friend said to me, it's like, he works 5 days a week. I only work 2. I'm absolutely fine doing more. What drives me up the wall is that he can't see it.
Yeah.
So, you know, earlier in the talk, you were saying this is why, you know, actually women have to ask. You know, we have to know that we don't see the world in the same way. I would use exactly the same argument to ask men to start having this conversation. It's like you can feel something's going wrong. You can feel there's resentment there. No one wants to feel like that. Understand you're not seeing the same thing and
make the invisible visible. I think that's the best tip. Like, show your workings. You learn that as a 6-year-old when you're first learning how to do maths. Do it in your relationship as well. If you're booking a class, explain how you got there and what work it took to get there. It's all those kind of little things are under acknowledged, and that's what can breed resentment.
yeah, you know, and I'd love for this to not be the case, but obviously I'm doing this podcast and still when Eloise explains some of the stuff to me, I have to put myself in a certain headspace that's like, you're not being criticized. You're not being told you're not good enough. Like men can't, we really struggle with that shame. So you've really got to do something to put yourself. So, you know, I can see her getting ready for our holiday in a way that I'm not. And, you know, she was like, actually, the planning of the children's clothes, all that stuff, that actually started months ago, you know, when I'm like, what have they still got? What are they going to be happy? All that stuff. It's so important for me to be able to hear that and acknowledge it, but which doesn't mean it's easy.
No. And then I think with those scenarios, it is hard to hand that over unless you start rooting through your kids' clothes and know exactly what sizes they have, what they need. So
She
I
doesn't
would
want to.
say
She doesn't want to hand it over, but she
exactly.
does
So
need it to be acknowledged.
acknowledge, but also what can you do that then isn't going to worry her? So our example is I also pack the clothes and I've already bought the swimming costumes that I know we need for August. And but my husband will book the holidays and the car hire and the accommodation because I mean, he doesn't love researching it. It's kind of a bit of a chore. But he has a clear idea of what he wants for the holiday. I'm maybe a bit less fussy, or I get frustrated very quickly when I'm looking at all these holiday options. They all blur into one, and so he books them, and so that is a huge amount of work as well.
Oh, all right, Little Miss Perfect Marriage. Last
No, I'm
question.
just I'm obviously I live. I mean, you're living and breathing the stuff as well, right? Like it's not equal in our relationship for sure,
Well,
but
what I
because I
wanted
live
to
with
ask
it,
was, you said it. You said it today, and there was an actual quote in the book where you were talking about. I think you're mainly talking about finances, but you're like, so there's no resentment, and I was like, there
yeah.
must be some resentment. Like, what's the thing that you guys keep coming back to? What's your perpetual row?
It's the anticipation. So has he ever cleaned the fridge? No. It's those little things that I anticipate that I do that he won't do. It's getting out the house on time. I will always be 10 minutes early, and he will always not be 10 minutes early to leave. And then we're stressed at the start of the day, right? So it's there's lots of little things. But I think because we live and breathe it, or I do in my work, I'm very vocal about it, about what we need and what we want. And I think showing up and being interested is what makes it less resent resentful. And I think the fact that we earn quite similarly as well, so we feel we both have the same economic power. We pool our earnings. We don't see money as his or mine. It's kind of shared. So I think those kind of shared goals. Golf, yes, okay, I do have one. He started playing golf. That's not just a 1 hour hobby like my run. That is a full 5 hour pursuit. And then he said, "Why don't you? I'd love it if you came to play golf." And I'm like, "Do you know what goal contagion is?" Which is what I wrote about in the book. And I will not take up golf because I will not let your goals filter over into mine.
Yeah. Also, I hate to chuck him in it, but have you got 4 hours?
He leaves at 6 a.m. So then he's back before 11.
Yeah, I do try and pull that one. I'm like, actually, I mean, my kids are older though. Steve, it's too early for golf, mate. You're about 4 years off golf. But yeah, I've got this thing. It's like, do you know what? If I'm back before any of you are out of bed, no one gets to say anything. So,
Exactly. And I think, you know, but then he'll say something like, "Well, you can go and do a 4 hour hobby as well." And I'm like, "But I won't."
this is sounding more like your typical marriage now.
But we laugh about it, and I think that's what keeps it like, you know, amicable. I think if I was genuinely really angry, or if he then came home and didn't then help with the kids, then it would not be okay, right?
Melissa's new book is Breadwinners and Other Power Imbalances That Influence Your Life. Her first book was The Motherhood Complex, and you can find all her stuff on her Instagram at Melissa_Hogenboom. You can find these full episodes with video on my YouTube channel at Alex in Dadland, and please follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Be a Happier Parent. I hope to see you next week.